Greetings all, welcome to Everything Borrowed, where we sit down to share stories and have conversations with entrepreneurs to artists and everyone in between. Today's episode is powered by Blake's Hard Cider, 100% fresh pressed, all natural and gluten-free, straight from our family's 75-year-old farm in Southeast Michigan. Find us in your local grocer or have Blake's direct ship to your home by visiting blakestore.com. Use promo code EverythingBorrowed to receive 10% off your first order. Must be 21 years of age. Please enjoy mindfully. What's up, everybody? My guest today is Spike Cohen. Spike was the vice presidential nominee in the Libertarian Party during the 2020 election. Today, Spike sits down with me to have a conversation about the current issues in the country, the dominance of the two-party system, his thoughts on free speech, and the necessity of Second Amendment rights, as well as what it would take to get a third-party candidate on the debate stage in the 2024 election. As a libertarian-leaning individual myself, I could not be more excited to have this conversation. I believe now more than ever we need more conversations and more third-party perspectives. I hope you enjoy. Spike, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, man?
I saw you were out in California.
Yeah, I was in Sacramento for the weekend to do an anti-lockdown thing out there.
We're dealing with our own lockdowns in Michigan to a degree, but it doesn't seem to compare to what's going on in California. Like, what's a little context for how bad it is and how aggressive? Because that's for sure the most aggressive lockdowns in the country right now.
Oh, absolutely. So I live in South Carolina where we have very minimal restrictions. So it's like restaurants and bars can't be open after, I think, 11, and they can't serve alcohol after 10. Because if you serve alcohol after 10, COVID knows or something. I don't know. Anyway, but I don't know. Whatever. I'm not sure what the reason is for that, but it's minimal. I mean, it's still hurting restaurants and bars, but overall, it's relatively minimal. I went to California. Everything's closed.
It's insane, right?
Yeah, it's nuts, and just it is crazy. It is not good. New York was similar when I went there. New York, when I was in Manhattan, it was a similar dynamic where almost everything was closed. There were a handful of restaurants that had, outdoor dining. I can't imagine doing outdoor dining in New York City right now, but I don't even think they allow that right now. So I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, we're in a state right now. It's only outdoor dining if it looks indoor. So we have these igloos. We're in Michigan, and it's free, which is crazy.
Which is worse.
It's worse. And what frustrates me even more is it's the illusion of doing something as opposed to doing something that would actually work. But before we get into all that, I wanted to just let you know. I want to raise up my libertarian card here, and I want to say that I was proud to punch the ticket with you and Jo Jorgensen in this past election. And as someone who's grown up in a Republican, skewed part of the country and went to college, and all my friends are liberal, especially in the last few years, I have been feeling very disenfranchised with politics in general, and there was no real guideposts to go that felt rational because there wasn't logic. It didn't feel applied across the board. And I would say
right
where I really have found solace in the Libertarian Party is it feels, even though it's, it may be principled and some of those principles may, you may have contentions with, but they seem to be, applied universally across all parties and all people. And I can really get down with that because we can actually start having conversations about, the issues as opposed to trying to make the issues work for one particular party or the other. So I appreciate you,
right.
Really, kind of shining the light on liberty and libertarian points of view. But I want to take a step back because I'm going to go at this assuming a lot of people don't know what libertarianism is. And I was hoping that I figured there's no one better to give us an elevator pitch or kind of a general philosophy of libertarianism as opposed to Republicans and Democrats. And I think that my sense is more people are aligned with libertarianism than they realize. And I think we just need to shine a brighter light on the party and its policies and its philosophy.
Sure. So the 10-second version of libertarianism is that libertarians believe that people do best when they're most free. The slightly longer version of libertarianism is that we believe that everyone owns themselves and has autonomy over themselves. And what that means is you own your body, you own your life. Because you own your body and your life, that means that you own your thoughts, you own your speech, you own all of those things. That also means you own your labor. No one should be able to make you do something that you don't want to do. And also, if you own your labor, that means that you own the product of your labor, which is your property. And we believe that we do best when we voluntarily work with each other and respect each other's self-ownership. Conversely, we believe that when someone tries to force you into something or tries to make you do something or tries to order you around or tries to take from you or hurt you, that's an act of aggression. And we believe that's wrong, not just for the reasons that everyone believes it's wrong to take from people or to hurt, take from them or hurt them or take their things from them, but also because it doesn't work. If I can take from you and everyone else that's watching and listening to this at home whenever I see fit, I don't have to give you good value for what I've taken because I can just take more of it. And I don't have to have good reasons for why I order you around. I can just order you around. And I don't have to be a good steward of what I have because I can just take more whenever I want to. And if we look at all the bad things that we're facing right now and have been facing throughout the years, they really just happen as a result of a system that has been created by Republicans and Democrats, whereby they presume the authority to take from us and order us around whenever they see fit. And that is not a good arrangement. Most people don't like monopolies. Government is one giant monopoly that is enforced with force and financed with theft. And so we recognize that people do best when they're most free.
And I think that's well put. And one of the things that I think was really apparent in this last election was how much of a monopoly the Republican and Democrat parties have on our political system. The fact that the third largest party in the country almost got no airtime, no visibility, no national coverage to the messaging as an alternative, I think really just shows you the amount of money that's in politics. And how do we do that? Do libertarians have to play that game? What is the way in which we can revitalize, our politics and our conversation here beyond the two-party system? And that's ultimately, I think what libertarians are poised to do, but we have a long hill to climb.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Yeah.
And the thing is, you said, do we have to become like them? I think that that's a bad idea for two reasons. Number one, if we become like them and we win, then so what? We became an L instead of an R or a D, but it doesn't really matter. We're doing the same things they did and for the same reasons they did. And for that matter, it's not going to work anyway. If I show up and say, yeah, look, I'm exactly like these other two guys, and everyone says, well, they're much more likely to win. Why would I vote for you? Right. So it doesn't really work. I think that what we need to do, and it's what I've set out to do after this election, and what I've been doing for the last couple months now, is we need to grow the party, and we need to do it at the grassroots level. And the way we need to do that is by looking at politics differently than Republicans and Democrats do. Instead of looking at politics as this machine-driven thing where we get billions of dollars from major corporations and use it to flood the airwaves with our message and buy influence or create influence through our positions of power with major corporations, we do the opposite. Just take the message directly to the people. And the way you do that is you go into the communities, both physically in person and, on social media and things like that, and take your message to them. And don't try to use media. Don't try to use these other things that aren't going to serve us, which I think has been a bit of a strategic error in the past. We have often, focused so much on getting media coverage and focus so much on, getting on the debate stage and things like that, which are important, but we focus so much on that, we've forgotten that there's 330 million people that would love to hear our message if we could get it to them. And, media is a good way to do it, but if they're not going to work with us, then we have to do the hard work of actually growing the grassroots. And what that looks like is going into these communities. And, what I've been doing is working with local and state Libertarian Party affiliates at the local level to put together messaging that works in those local communities and demonstrate to people. And I'll be doing that in workshops that I'm going to be doing across the country, both in person and on Zoom and things like that, to teach libertarians how to talk to people and how to bring them into the movement. When we do that at the grassroots level, now we have a base of support. Now all that other stuff that we want comes with it. The donations come with it, so we have more money to work with. The media attention comes with it, so we have more interviews and media presence, and eventually the getting enough in the polling to be able to get on the debate stage comes with it. But we have to do the grassroots work first, which is harder, but it's our only viable path.
Right. I think that's well said. One thing that I've always kind of thought is that we really need to be focusing down ticket, down to the local and municipal level, and I think that's one area where we can really start there and really focus on that area, so people become more familiar with the party, more familiar with the ideals of the party, the candidates within the party. Yep. You talked about something that it's kind of ripe timing, is taking the messaging through media, through social media. We've obviously in the last few days have seen a fallout in the national narrative as it relates to big tech censorship, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, did it go too far? I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on free speech? And I feel like this is a libertarian's worst nightmare. It's you want to support free speech, but you also don't want government interference within individual companies to be able to do what they want. And so I feel that this is one where, as a libertarian philosophy, I'm wrestling with a little bit, trying to really understand. But it goes to a broader conversation: is are our narratives being weaponized to a degree, and is the free flow of information really happening in the way it should? And I just wanted your perspective on that, because I feel like you're closer to it than most.
Yeah. So this is a very heated debate even within libertarian circles, and for understandable reasons. You have what appear to be two competing interests, which is one is allowing people to do with their property what they see fit, which is social media companies own their platforms and are free to be able to set their criteria for what what is or is not allowed on their platforms, but also the idea of people being free to be able to express themselves. So here's how we got where we got. We have to look at why there's only 5 or 6 corporations that control, or 7, whatever it is, that control 99% of social media. It's the same reason why in any sector of the economy you have a small handful of corporations that control that entire market for the most part. It's because of regulations and tax burdens that have crowded out all of this smaller competition, so that these larger companies can thrive without any smaller, disruptive competitors coming up and threatening their market share. So all these regulations that we think are supposed to protect us from big corporations, they actually do the opposite. What they do is they make it prohibitively expensive for smaller companies to be able to operate, because they can't afford the cost of compliance with those regulations. And so we see that in social media as well. In fact, oddly enough, with social media, it's actually less restricted than most other sectors of the economy. So that's how a TikTok or something like that can happen, is that you can have a really good idea and have it sprout up. But the bottom line is that we need to focus more on, if we're not being served by the current social media, we need to focus more on creating our own alternative social media to be able to not have to deal with Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And I'm actually talking with the owners of Flote, FLOTE, which is a social media app that is actually very, very good. It's crypto based. It's blockchain based. You can send or receive crypto on it. It is free. They do not spy on you. They do not censor opinions on it. And there are many others like that as well. And that is the solution to that. The debate over whether or not Facebook should be allowed to censor content, the answer is that the alternative is letting the incoming president, Joe Biden, decide what is or is not allowed on social media.
I think that's a good point. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of build into that conversation is, libertarians protect the free market, but do we protect it? Are our principles at some point hurting us in the national debate, or is that something we have to stay strong to? In the fact that you look at a conversation like freedom of speech, and you look at something,
right,
and you look at some of these things, are you allowed to say anything, to anyone at any time? How much do you protect it? Is there a time where it becomes, hurtful and dangerous, and who makes those decisions and who decides that? And I think you articulated it well with does Joe Biden, does the next president, but, you look at also what we're running into, within the tech, kind of the technocracy as they call it, but you have 5 or so mega corporations that are also have all the infrastructure for these platforms to even exist. And that seems to be a problem beyond just the application. It's the infrastructure that people use on a daily basis. And at some point, does that become like the phone service, like something that's taken away from the public sector? And do you believe that? I don't think libertarians do philosophically, but you see where the conversation goes a little bit with that.
I believe that the problem is an extension of why we should have fewer regulatory burdens that are making it harder for there to be more options in the first place. A lot of people think that the monopoly of Ma Bell that used to exist, I know I'm dating myself now by even knowing what Ma Bell is. For those who don't know, prior to the 1980s, there was basically one phone company. And they had one phone that you could get for like 20 years. It was the same phone that you could get, right? So it was when a new phone came out, it was like the new phone came out, and it wasn't like now where it's a new phone every few months
3
that
months
comes out, or every few weeks whatever, from all these different it was the phone that everyone used. And government actually stepped in and broke up Ma Bell into all these different companies, and they also deregulated. And this is the other part that happened: they broke it up, but they also got rid of a lot of the regulations that allowed for that allowed for the creation of this single mega monster in the first place. The creation of Ma Bell didn't happen because that's the natural state of the market to create a monopoly. It was because the regulatory burdens that the federal government created made it so that no one else could come up and try to create a competitor. So when you're talking about social media, yes, it's also the infrastructure. Yes, it's when I say big tech, it's not just Facebook, Twitter, and Alphabet, the company that owns Google and YouTube. And it's also Facebook owns Instagram. It's also, it's also Microsoft. It's also Cisco. It's also GoDaddy. It's also a bunch of other companies that control the hosting infrastructure. Or Amazon with their AWS. We just saw that with Parler. It's also it's sort of adjacent to big tech are the banks that control the payment processing systems. There are all of these things, layers of things that are built upon, and it's the fact that you have small handfuls in each of these sectors working together, and that's because of this regulatory burden. When you get rid of that, it allows for many more options, and when you have many more options, not only do you have different alternatives to go to, but they're less likely to be so hard on you to begin with because they don't want to lose you to the competition. So it creates more accountability by simply having more options. What's good about the libertarian ideology and what keeps it consistent is that when it is applied consistently, it deals with both the freedom aspect and the fairness aspect. We often associate freedom with with people being able to harm others and get away with it, or a certain number of people doing really, really well and most other people not doing well. But no, when freedom is applied consistently, then it's also more equitable. Our natural state is to be social and equitable and fair and kind to each other. It is when coercive ideas are imposed upon us and we have a system imposed upon us that we don't really have a viable option to get rid of except to dismantle it. That's what creates the unfairness. That's what creates the inequity. That's what creates the censorship and so forth.
Liberal friends will talk about, the protection of the commons, and that's, the big concern with deregulation. I mean, how do you believe the free market solves that? Or are there times where we have to really look and set these precedents and standards? I mean, we can't just say, deregulate everything. Maybe we can, and maybe some libertarians would say that, but I don't know if that's a popular opinion nationally. There has to be, and going into another question, to protect freedom at large in the current system that we're at, do we have to become, I don't want to say less principled, but do we have to, meet in the middle somewhere to bring more people under the libertarian umbrella from a Republican standpoint and Democratic standpoint?
So there's a few different questions there. The first one is the question of how. I'll answer the last question first. How do and that's, do we need to be less principled in order to be able to bring people in and be more effective? I think that when you present a message in a way that connects with people and is empathetic and demonstrates that we care about people, and then explains how our ideas fix things, you don't have to sacrifice principle. Now, can we welcome people in who aren't 100% libertarian? Sure. Libertarians don't even agree on what 100% libertarian is. So who are we to tell people that are only 70% libertarian that they can't come in? But that's different than sacrificing our principles. We can say, hey, listen, these are our principles. To whatever degree you agree with them, we'd love to have you join us in helping to push them. But these are our principles. These are what we believe in. The second part of that is to what degree we need to compromise on things once we actually are in positions of power. And the answer to that is to whatever degree is relative to how much power we have. So if, for example, in a city council race, if there's a city council of 6 people and we're able to get one libertarian on it, a lot of compromise is going to happen in order for that libertarian to be able to get anything accomplished. They'll say, hey, listen, this is what I want. This is what you guys want. I'm going to have to meet you most of the way to try to get some of what I want. But if we get 4 libertarians on that 6-person council, now a lot less compromise has to happen. So I think it's really a matter of just bringing people in. Is there going to be an incremental aspect to this? Yeah, sure. There's no snapping your fingers and making all coercive activity go away and make government either go away or be, this tiny little thing that only keeps track of a certain number of things and doesn't really get, infringe on your life in any real way. But, that's different than sacrificing principle. The other question you asked was about the commons. The commons is something that will always exist for the reason that we are not islands. People are not islands. We will always need to interact with each other. We will always need to travel to be able to get to one another. We will always want to have common gathering places. The question is not, should there be a commons? Naturally, there will be a commons. We aren't always going to live in our own separate properties and, that are all, bordered off to one another. And, we attack each other the very moment someone crosses it. That, how are you going to go get food? Like, it doesn't work that way. But the question is, who should be managing the commons? Government has demonstrated itself uniquely terrible at managing things. We've seen it, whether it's with the environment, whether it is with infrastructure, whether it is with our safety, whether it is with, first response and law enforcement, anything that government does, it typically does poorly, expensively, arbitrarily, and in a way that benefits a small handful of people at the expense of literally everyone else. So what my answer is, yes, there should be a commons, and the makeup of that commons and the makeup of the services that a community needs should be decided by that community. Communities should decide what their police look like. Communities should decide what their parks look like. Communities should decide what their roads look like. And they should be empowered with their money and their power and their freedom and opportunity to be able to do that, as opposed to having it taken from them and handled by politicians and bureaucrats to the benefit of the cronies that put them in office thousands of miles away. That doesn't work.
But is it my sense correct that as we go from one election to the next, it just keeps getting bigger at the national level and more things are being, pushed down at the state and local level? And are we losing that autonomy at a community level, in our current situation?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, we are, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's a slow erosion.
That has been, and that's why. So a lot of times, Republicans and Democrats will say, if we don't win this election, everything is lost. And there are even some libertarians that go, if we don't win this election, then it's all over. And that's not true. This has been a slow, steady process that has continued for quite some time. And we have to look at in order to be able to answer a question like what's going to happen in the future, we really have to look at the root of things. When the revolution happened, it was to get rid of a king who on his own arbitrarily decided what was or was not going to happen, right? So the revolutionaries got rid of the king. And they initially imposed a government that was governed under something called the Articles of Confederation, which was an attempt to create a very small government that would permanently stay small. So the federal government had no power of taxation. They had to ask for money from the states for things that they needed to do. Okay. Mm-hmm. There was no executive. It was all decided by a congressional Congress, Continental Congress. What was the next thing? Oh, and any changes could only be made with unanimous consent of the Congress, of the Continental Congress.
Well, we've moved far away from that.
Well, we've moved way far away from that. So it pains me that Hamilton is such a popular musical that has lionized him as some kind of great figure, because he's actually terrible. And one of the things that Hamilton and the Federalists did was they illegally, because they needed to have unanimous consent and did not get unanimous consent, they supplanted the Articles of Confederation and replaced it with the Constitution, or as I call it, the Chia Pet government. It started very, very small, but it was created to be able to slowly get bigger and bigger over time. It started as something that fits in a corner of your fridge, and you open it up and you go, hey, that's cute. But eventually it's so big that you have to condemn your house and move. So that is what we're under. And it's just going to continue to grow and grow and grow until we make a course correction to end that. And that's not a Republican thing or a Democrat thing. And for that matter, it's not even a Libertarian Party thing. It is a statism thing. It is a cult of the omnipotent state thing. Until we get rid of the idea in the public debate that government is an inherently good thing that should be given power to help us, when we recognize that the only way it can help us is to first take something from us, that it can't give us crumbs unless it takes our bread loaf first, until we challenge that and help change the minds of the people, it's going to continue to grow. Once we change the minds of the people and get into positions of influence and power to be able to dismantle those systems and take all that power and freedom and money that's been taken out of the hands of individuals in the communities that they live in and put it back in their hands where it belonged, then we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, and I think you talked earlier about, the compromise and having, you were talking at a local level, having one libertarian on a local board, and that there's going to be a compromise happen. And for me, as far as from where I sit and my vantage point is, the only way we're really going to find compromise at the national level is to get a third party, ideally the Libertarian Party, to be at a place to be able to sway the discussion at the national level. And I don't know if that's a 5% of the population support. I'm not sure what that number is, that tips the scale. But to me, that would bring a lot of people from the fringes, because right now you're seeing, the right go far right and the left go far left, and people are, polarizing at the ends. And to have someone that can sway the election, that can bring their constituents, under one side of the house or the other, I think you will start to see real compromise. And how far away is that? Is it realistic to think the Libertarian Party can be in that position in 2024? Is it a 2028? Is it a 50-year game? What does the Libertarian Party feel?
I hope not.
Me neither.
Yeah. First of all, I hope it's not a 50-year game. So get to the point where we can get in a few libertarians in Congress and in the Senate, enough to be able to be a wedge that, compromises have to be made for either side to get anything accomplished. I think that's very feasible by 2022 if we do the work. Mm-hmm. Right. So and this isn't to disparage the hard work of libertarians and activists who have worked up until now. It's to say that there has to be a new way of doing things. And it's something that I'm already working with Libertarian Party heads and affiliates and activists and candidates across the country, that we need to focus on. How do we grow the grassroots? How do we get enough people in positions, and how do we show the candidates how they can win winnable races? Right. Not just in Congress or for the White House eventually, but in local races as well. And so one of the things I've done is I started a show called Culture of Winning, and it's where I interview elected libertarians who have been elected to office and talk to them about how they got elected, and the challenges they faced, the successes they had, the things they did that worked, the things they did that didn't, because we win in local and county and regional races all the time. We have hundreds of people that are in those positions. We can replicate those wins. The things that it takes to win a city council race are the same things it takes to win a congressional race.
Just apply principles.
Matter, it's the same things. it's the same principles. It's the same thing for that matter that it takes to win in a national, a presidential race, but that's obviously a much bigger economy of scale, but not necessarily so much with some of these congressional races. Yes, the district the district size that you need to win for a congressional race is larger than a city council race, but not exponentially so. It's large enough where you just scale up what's being done at the city level, and now you can win a congressional race. So I think the biggest thing we need to do, first of all, is demystify the idea of libertarians getting elected. It happens a lot. It happens all the time. It's just not happening at the federal level yet. But in the same way that what's an example? It took forever for Bitcoin to go above 20,000, and then once it did, it just broke
to the moon.
There is such a thing as to the moon. So there is a psychological barrier in place too, there are structural.
Well, I was going to say,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. As I fancy myself interested in marketing, and as it relates to my business, dwellings. Yep. It's where I spend a lot of my time and a lot of my thinking. And when I talk to my friends, I talk to people about politics because I'm passionate about it. I feel like we have a marketing issue and a branding issue on our hands as much as anything. I think we have not, as a party, done a good enough job of communicating the values and packaging those values in a way that's digestible to people looking for another option. I think there's just so much opportunity to really look at the party, holistically, not to change the principles, not to change our values, but our communication in the way in which we communicate those parties. And to me, if we can solve that, between in the next election at 2022 or 2024, I think we're going to make huge strides because people are looking. There couldn't be a better time to be a third party to really bring people under the umbrella because people want normalcy, people want discourse, they want conversation, they want to not argue with their neighbors or their family members over politics. And I think if we could find a way to really look and be honest with ourselves from a branding, marketing perspective of the party, I think that we could, without compromising any values or anything that we're really after fundamentally, I think we can make great headway there. And that's just my observation as I've been very, very involved from the sidelines this year looking at the Libertarian Party and I'm like, we have a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of opportunity.
We have a lot of opportunity, and there have definitely been some missteps in the past. You're 100% correct on it. Libertarians, silver lining of the continued decline of the situation that we're facing is that more and more people are looking for a viable option. Think about, after that first debate between Trump and Biden.
That was ridiculous, by the way. That was I couldn't believe. I've never been more embarrassed, maybe up until recently in the last week, to be an American, because that was children screaming at each other. Insane. Imagine
if the people that watched that and said, oh God, I can't vote for either one of them. Imagine if there had been a viable third choice. That third choice would have won in a landslide. A choice that they knew about, right?
Right.
We have a viable third choice, but a choice that they actually knew about. Here has been, if I had to distill the problem with libertarian messaging in a nutshell, here is how I would do it. Libertarians are often very, what's the word I want to use? Cerebral in the way we present things. We present things as systems, as ideas, as philosophies, as an ethos, and as opposed to connecting with people on what their concerns are, and then telling them how we can fix their problems. So, for example, if I were, it sounds like you said you have a background in marketing. I have a background in marketing and sales. If I were to cold call someone to try to get them to sign up for one of my website packages, and they said, well, what do you do? And I go, well, my philosophy about web design is that we need to have a holistic approach to how we combine the aesthetics of the design with the marketing ideas, and then factoring in search engine searchability, and how it will integrate well with social media. They'll hang up on me. They have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. Libertarians often think if we can come up with the perfect argument, the most rebuttal-free, unflawed, flawless argument, and just present it to people, and they'll go, my God, look at this argument. This is the most logical thing I've ever seen. Every bit of this makes perfect sense to me. I can't find a single thing that I could factually challenge. I'm now a libertarian. That's not how it works. What we need to do,
we got to answer their pain.
We have to answer their pain points.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I'm talking to a salesperson. So this is why I like talking to salespeople. Have you heard of the feel, felt, found method?
No.
Okay, so this is an old cold calling thing, but feel, felt, found. We hear how you feel. Other people have also felt that way. And we have found that the way to solve the things that you feel and other people have felt is whatever it is. And you can apply that to anything. But in order to do that, the feel part of that is you have to listen to them. You have to actually care about what their concerns are, and you have to demonstrate that you care before you can ever have a conversation. Then once you have demonstrated, yes, I get what you're saying. I totally see how you feel, and I agree with you. It's definitely a big problem, and I and others definitely have. And then the felt part of that is explaining what the problem is. So if someone comes to me and talks to me about, healthcare, and they're concerned about the cost of healthcare, I don't say, well, listen, it's none of my business what you're paying for healthcare. Healthcare is not a right. We just need to get government out of it. And frankly, I don't know why you would even think that it would. But no. They're worried about the cost of healthcare. So you say, yeah, the cost of healthcare is ridiculous. We're spending more money. The government is spending more money per patient in this country than in almost any other country. Just like 4 countries whose governments spend more money per patient than the U.S. is. And then we spend 3 times that much out of pocket ourselves as well. We're spending something like 4 times as much as any other developed country average for healthcare. What a mess this is. So we've demonstrated that we care and understand the problem. Then from there, we go to the found. We say, here is what led us to that problem. And we can talk about how bad government policy led to the creation of comprehensive insurance, which is what initially drove up the cost, and how that driving up of the cost led to things like the cost plus rules, which drove the cost up even more. Then from there, how Medicare got involved, and then from there, how Obamacare got involved, and Medicare Part D, and how each one of these things has made things worse. And then we can bring it back to how these types of systems, patent protections for drug companies, for drugs that have been around for decades, like insulin and epinephrine, certificate of need laws that allow hospitals to, large crony hospital systems to keep smaller competitors from opening new hospitals or expanding their existing ones. All of these things drive up the cost, drive down the supply of healthcare. So we have less healthcare to be able to get, and it's more expensive. It makes it so that we don't even know what the cost is because of all the bureaucracy and red tape. It allows for more corruption because there's so many, halls and mirrors and smoke where people can't really see what the other side's doing. It makes it, much more ridiculous to be able to try to access healthcare. And as a result, people die needlessly. And we knew that before this pandemic. And then we talk about how to solve that by getting rid of those bad policies and by allowing for there to be a price equilibrium where doctors can only charge what people can afford, where medical companies can't force you to use their service through patent protections. All of these things we can talk about, but first you have to demonstrate to your audience that you actually care about them. And all of this is part of a fundamental change that is in the process of happening, but needs to continue to happen in the greater Libertarian Party. If I accomplished nothing else last year in this campaign, it was to show the vast majority of libertarians at the grassroots level and at the leadership level that this is how you message libertarianism. When you talk about libertarian ideas, you do it from the standpoint of centering it on the person who is asking you instead of our ideas. Instead of saying that we're going to take over the world and leave everyone alone, which to the vast majority of people sounds like neglect. Instead, we say we're going to take back the power that's been taken from you and all the money and all the freedom that's been taken from you and put it back in your hands where it belongs so you can be empowered to be able to do things for yourself.
Well, as someone who's been following you, I think you're achieving that goal, and you are, and people are listening, and I think people are growing in their interest, and I think you do a really good job of coming across very genuine, authentic, and you're not fighting for what would seem like your own self-gain. It feels like you really are trying to communicate a philosophy. And I mean, you can probably speak to life on the road, trying to run for the presidency and vice presidency.
Right.
But it really does come across that way. And it's very refreshing right now because, I don't know who would want to sign up to be a politician in this, current landscape, but someone with your philosophy, your take, your way in which you deal with situations coming at you. I think you handle it very gracefully, both you and Joe. So yeah, I mean, great, much more gracefully than the candidates most of the country got to vote for.
Well, that was a low bar to be sure, but thank you. Yeah, the other candidates set some very low bars for us in terms of competence and grace and integrity and things like that. But we did jump those bars with great gusto, so I appreciate that. No, this is not and never has been about me. If I were doing this to pursue my personal political ambition, I wouldn't do it in a third party.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's be clear. I would use the cheat code of running as a Republican or a Democrat. I'm in a very red area. So, I'm in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's a red. We were Trump country before Trump was running for president. And, if I were going to do that, I'd run as a Republican, and I would introduce some liberty ideas here and there, but I would primarily be concerned about climbing up the ladder of the Republican Party and working my way up. Or if I were in a blue area, climbing up the ladder of the Democratic Party and working my way up. And, I'd convince myself, but I'm occasionally sharing liberty idea. No, you're working your way up a machine, and it's going to envelop and swallow you whole.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Even great people, from a Republican or Democrat, they get into the party and it slowly transforms them. There's no way around it, and that to me seemed very clear over the past 8 years. That no matter how principled, no matter how good of a person you were, that system will eat you up, and it just tells me it's the wrong system to be a part of. That's how I felt.
Yeah. And frankly, being in government will eat you up too. That's why I'm a big fan of the idea of things like term limits.
Yeah, where are they? Why don't we have term limits? It seems crazy to me that we don't. It seems like that would, if you got rid of term limits, gerrymandering, and getting dark money out of politics, I think we'd be halfway there. But the reason we have term limits is because they entrench people's power and allow them to get a career out of staying in office and getting favors from the cronies that they do the bidding of. When it comes to getting money out of politics, the best way to do that is get politics out of money. When you put government in a position of having the power to make decisions that affect everyone's lives in major ways, you are creating a supply of something that didn't exist before, which is the ability to hand favors off to corporations who supply those needs, right? So if government wasn't, in charge of regulating healthcare, then you wouldn't have, if government didn't have the power to set healthcare policy, then you wouldn't have big pharma going to government and giving them millions of dollars and saying, hey, we want laws against importing drugs from other countries. And we want patent protections for drugs that have been around for longer than any of us have been alive. And, we want taxpayer money to fund research and development for drugs that we then make billions of dollars on afterwards and don't share any of that profit with the people who paid for us to develop the drug. Like, this wouldn't happen, right? So this is where a lot of people on the left get confused, because they correctly recognize that there is, this cottage industry, many cottage industries built around powerful people influencing government. But they think the answer is to expand the power of government and to give them more oversight ability. Well, it was the oversight ability that gave them the ability to be able to do that for those people in the first place. If you take that power away from them, and now the corporations can't just serve politicians in exchange for favors, they have to serve you. And if they don't, you go to someone else. And you can still go to someone else. Even if they do provide for you, you can go to someone else too. It empowers you. Decentralization of power and influence, putting the power and the money back in your hands, makes you the king or queen or whatever other designation you want to be able to. You're the one now being served. If you're the one with the money and the power, you're the one being served. I am fine with patronage by corporations of the people they want money from. I just want it to be you. Yeah. The problem with that is it means you have to take self-responsibility. And I don't know how much of our population wants self-responsibility for their own decisions. And that's been one of the things I wonder if you get the politics that you deserve sometimes. And, are we, a population who doesn't want to think and doesn't want that, and is it just our own laziness that's brought us here? Is it really this bad government, or is it really the population that has not done the work, has not wanted to say, we're going to take self-responsibility for our actions, for our business ethics, for our business ethos. And, that's something that I've thrown around in my head. I don't know how true that is, but you hear people say you get the politics you deserve. You believe that?
Right. So here is the analogy I use, and I'm actually borrowing it from Joe's first running mate. When Jo Jorgensen ran for vice president in 1996, her running mate was a guy named Harry Brown, one of the giants in the Libertarian Party. And Harry used to say, government breaks someone's leg, steals their wallet, uses some of the money to buy them a crutch, and says, hey, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have this crutch. I'm going to go a step further. Government beats someone within an inch of their life, takes their wallet, uses some of the money to buy them a crutch, takes all of their food, gives them back a few crumbs from one of the loaves of bread that they stole from them, and said, hey, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have that loaf of, that wouldn't have those crumbs and that crutch. But it's worse than that. Harry was correct in what he was saying, but the way he said it, unfortunately, he said it in a quip that you could put on a tweet now, right? It was in the 90s version of tweeting was a bumper sticker, right? So it's a bumper sticker
right.
slogan, but because it's a bumper
I never
sticker
thought about
slogan,
that. That is. Tweets used to be bumper stickers.
Yeah, they were bumper stickers, right? Yeah, you would drive around and like, hey, and then everyone would go, yeah, where did you get that bumper sticker? And then you tell them. That was the sharing. The sharing was they would have to go buy one. But in that bumper sticker slogan, it makes it sound as though it's a single thing. It happened once. What a terrible thing. No, it happens every day. It happens every minute. It happens multiple times a day to all of us. Over time, as that keeps happening, day after day, generation after generation, eventually you have people who don't know anything other than largely being robbed of everything and given back some of it if they prove that they really, really need it. So we can call that laziness. I call it conditioned irrelevance or conditioned poverty. So, for example, I toured. I also think it's overstated. I went through housing projects and did door knocking tours during this campaign early last year, about this time last year, actually, before the pandemic. And I went to some of the poorest communities and talked to people. These are the people that I'm told it's a waste of time talking to them about libertarianism because they just want to live off of the government. Well, I met with them, and almost every person I spoke with had a side hustle, a business. They had a thing that they did, okay? Everything from mowing lawns, food service, DJing, fixing, handyman stuff, plumbing, electrical work. Some people sold weed. It was everything, like all sorts of different things. I met someone, you own a farm. I met someone who had a small farm where they made like certain herbs and seasonings and stuff, like a very, very small farm in the back, in their back little partitioned off yard area. And they had a little bit and they would sell it to people. Okay. These are like things that they did, but it was all illegal. The reason it was illegal, now the weed was illegal because weed's illegal, but these other things were perfectly legal services as long as you have the licensing.
Right, and not incorporated.
Well,
right?
The licensing for these things and the taxes that it would take, the fees and everything else, we're talking thousands or in some cases tens or in other cases hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to have permission to do something. Well, that's a regressive tax. If you're poor, if you're penniless, you can't afford those licenses. So then you have to make one of two choices. Actually, one of three choices. You have to go and work for someone else. Actually, no, that's still choice number one. You have to go and work for someone else and make probably not enough money to be able to even make ends meet. So now you're relying on government housing and aid and subsidization just to be able to afford the basic cost of living. Or you do this thing, but you keep it little, right? Like you don't broadcast it out there
under the radar.
Right? You tell people,
yeah, right.
Under the
Cash
radar,
only.
because
yeah.
otherwise the police can come and take it from you. Well, you have a background in marketing. What's the stupidest thing for a company to do? Not tell anyone that they're doing it. They have to do that. They have to go to the people that they're doing business with and say, hey, listen, don't tell everyone I'm doing this. If it's someone you really trust, you can tell them, but don't tell anyone else. Can you imagine trying to run your business where you told the people you were doing business with, listen, don't just tell anyone I'm doing this, right? Much less doing any marketing of your own.
Sure.
Of course they're not billionaires. I met people that should be millionaires. I probably met some people who should be billionaires. And I met many more who should be more than able to provide for themselves and their families, and even provide some jobs and opportunities to others, and also be able to give to charities and mutual aid to be able to help others pull themselves up who aren't able to do it themselves. So the libertarian answer to things is not to take away the safety net. The libertarian answer things is to put the ladders back so people can climb out of those nets, because most people don't want to live in them. So, are there some lazy people? Yes. Is it that everyone's lazy and doesn't want to make decisions for themselves? No, it was robbed of them, and they've been conditioned to believe that the only thing they can do is ask daddy government for some of their own stuff back.
I think that's well said. When you look, I want to switch gears here a little bit, because I don't know how much time you have today, but one of the things I really wanted to talk about was, you see the increase in racial tensions, across the country. And, to me that seems like, obviously it's a problem. We're seeing issues with with police forces. We're seeing, issues of, inequality and inequity in certain situations. We're seeing privatized jails. We're seeing a system that I think really perpetuates,
cottage industry.
Yeah. And what's the libertarian take on some of these issues, whether it's police brutality, whether it's, how we regulate our police force, and how do we kind of bridge the divide that's happening racially across the country? Because it seems like it's kind of hitting a fever pitch and hit a fever pitch, this past year.
So in a nutshell, it goes down. They all fall under three things. Hold government actors accountable when they do wrong is number one. Okay. Number two, get rid of victimless crime laws. If you aren't hurting someone, if you aren't robbing someone, if you aren't defrauding someone, if you aren't taking from an actual victim, then it shouldn't be illegal. Okay. Even if you don't like it, even if it's not something you would do, it should not be illegal. And then number three, is to hold them accountable, get rid of government laws, and community-based solutions. Allow the communities to decide what their law enforcement looks like, what their police departments look like. When you so the first part, ending qualified immunity, is the biggest part of that, and not just getting rid of qualified immunity for police officers and government agents, also getting rid of regular immunity, absolute immunity for politicians and judges and prosecutors too. When they can be held accountable, when they hurt you, if I hurt you or you hurt me, we can be held accountable for that. But if a police officer hurts you, they largely are not held accountable unless they murder you or something like that. And then even then, the thin blue line comes out to protect you. We need to get rid of victimless crime laws, because those things are what fill up our jails. Something like over 90% of people that are in state and federal prisons are in there for drug crimes, gun crimes. And when I say gun crimes, I don't mean using a gun to hurt. I mean owning a gun that was illegal. Okay. Not actually hurting anyone, just owning a gun that is illegal. Drug crimes, gun crimes, and tax related crimes.
Isn't this because that's a privatized industry though, and that maybe should be taken over by the government?
Well, the government, it originally was taken over by the government,
right,
but then it was becoming so costly that they came up with the idea of privatizing it. So the problem is they created a cottage industry when they did that, right? So
got it.
It costs less. Private industry does better at
everything,
doing corrections, because it costs less per prisoner, and usually the conditions are better, right? But the problem is you now have lobbies that are built around creating laws just so that they can fill the prisons.
Yeah, well, I think back to your original point, if we only put people in jail for harmful crimes and we got rid of victimless crimes, we wouldn't have there wouldn't be the supply to
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And another big part of that is whatever protections there are for workers outside of prison, they also need to be inside of prison. So if there's a minimum wage, there needs to be a minimum wage for prisoners, and it needs to be the exact same thing. If there are rules that govern how many hours that they work, then it should be there as well. If there are, in some states, you aren't allowed to not, if you're able-bodied, you're not allowed to not do work. If you're able-bodied, those need to go away. That's literal slavery. All of these situations, if they were paid something, the demand for prison labor would go away, which would dry up that multi-billion-dollar industry that's not talked about nearly enough. right? So if we get rid of that, that's a big thing. And then community-based solutions. When a community decides what their police department looks like, what the rules for engagement are, and those types of things, instead of having it being decided at the state and federal level, those police are more accountable to the people that they are directly serving. That's a big part of this.
It used to be that way.
It did used to be that way.
Right.
Police departments were typically, Police departments were typically a community
you
thing.
You used to have to live in the community you served, and I think that's a great philosophy because the people at the store, the people you're arresting, and you're going to be more, there's going to be a human element to your policing, if you will. So I don't know why we moved away from that, but it seems like we had it figured out at one point. I wanted to ask you too. You talked about if you were really in this for political gain, to rise up the ranks within the Republican or Democratic Party, that would have been the route you had taken if it was purely political. Right. But what brought you to the Libertarian Party? For me, it was Ron Paul in college. I was smoking weed, hanging out in college, and I was like, I like what this guy has to say. Everyone else seems nuts. I mean, for me, that was it.
It's weird. I didn't come over to the Libertarian Party until I was sober. It's funny. I'm an outlier that way.
Yeah.
So I used to be a neocon. 9/11 worked me up, had me believing that the terrorists hated us for our freedom and we had to go bomb the world for peace or whatever. It sounds stupid saying it now, but I believed it. And when I would hear people like Ron Paul, another one is Matt Kibbe. He was someone that was, he was a libertarian, but he was in conservative circles that he would talk. And, they were saying, like, if you want a small government that stays off your back, you're not going to get it with this massive empire that spies on everyone and, indefinitely detains people without warrants and, or even without a stated stated reason or anything like that. You can't get it by suspending habeas corpus and letting them detain anyone they want to for as long as they want. Like, that's not going to happen. And I didn't listen for a very long time, but over time, seeing all their predictions come true, and also as my business became more and more successful, and seeing what happens when you have a business that becomes more and more successful, not multi-billionaire successful where you now own government, but up normal level of success. Then those two things led me to realize, I don't think government's good at anything. And that led me to libertarianism, and it was sort of kind of a gradual evolution of beliefs until I became like a straight up hardcore anarcho-capitalist libertarian. But that's where I am now. And so it wasn't really any one single moment or person. It was sort of a confluence of events over time. It also, I think if I had to pick one single moment that really challenged my beliefs was when I was saying, well, we need to have, some kind of government because, we can't trust people. And someone said to me, a guy named Lou Sander said to me, if you don't trust people with power over their own lives, why would you trust them with power over other people's lives? And if you do trust them with power over other people's lives, why would you trust them with power over their own life? And I went, well, it's not that simple. There are some people that I would trust with that. And he says, yeah, but who decides that? And I went, the people. Uh-oh. And so that was kind of my moment when I realized, like, oh no, this doesn't make any sense, does it?
Right.
But it was sort of a gradual, other than that one kind of brief, like, it was sort of a gradual evolution over time.
Sure. And as you chart your path forward, in this political sphere, I know you're a businessman and you've, obviously ran for vice president in this last election. Do you see yourself maintaining, the political, narrative and the political journey in your coming years, as far as promoting the Libertarian Party and growing it, or basically, I'm asking you, are you going to be running again at any point in time?
So you started the question off good, and I was saying yes. So my goal right now is grow the party. Let's grow it into something viable. When people ask me, I got asked on the election. I actually was getting asked before this election, and I thought, guys, we haven't even finished this one yet. But people were asking me, are you going to run for president in 2024? Or are you going to run again for vice president in 2024? Or are you going to run for governor of South Carolina in 2022? Or are you going to run against Lindsey Graham for Senate in 2020 or whatever? All these things. And my answer is the same now as it was then. I don't want to run for anything where I don't even have a shot in hell on getting on the debate stage. I've already done that. It's not fun. Would not recommend. It was actually, I should say, it was a lot of fun. It was incredibly challenging. I had a great time. I met an incredible number of activists. We need to stop losing admirably. It is time to put people in to put ourselves in a position where whoever we run for president has a shot of actually making it onto the debate stage. Okay. And not just for president, for Senate, for Congress, for governor, whatever. We need to grow the party. So that's my focus. And my primary focus is on creating systems for communication and activism where we can be effective, giving people actionable things so that they can start having victories, that they can, small and large victories that they can win, not just political campaign victories, but victories like membership growth, donation growth, things like that, things that we can create actionable things. Work with other people to implement similar systems for communication and activism in their local communities so that they can start growing at the local and statewide level. And all of these things sort of working together in confluence in a cumulative way so that we can make those major gains in 2022, 2024, and so forth. Whether that lends itself to my running in 2024, I have a lot of time to make that decision, and it will rely on a lot of things. And honestly, that's not my primary concern, and I doubt it'll be my primary concern then whether I run or not. I'm more focused on us winning, and if I'm the best person to do that, then I'll do it. And if there's someone better than me, then I'll put my support behind that person. Even better, I get to stay home.
Well, I think that's a noble pursuit, and probably one that will yield better progress because you're doing it beyond just yourself. You're doing it for the party. You're doing it to grow a third perspective. With what's going on in the Republican Party right now, are there people that you could see coming over to the Libertarian side? And is that maybe a play to really start winning at the stage, is bringing people out of the Republican Party or maybe are disenfranchised with this last, with President Trump and kind of his ungraceful end to his presidency? And is there an opportunity to bring some of them under our umbrella, or does that go against our grassroots philosophy that we're trying to build?
No, I think there are many people that are looking at the state of the Republican Party and saying, "Wow, I came here for smaller government, less taxes, less spending, more power of the individual to be able to chart their own path, and I got a cult of personality built around a billionaire con artist, celebrity, reality show host, and people storming the gates to try to keep him in office after he lost an election. I don't think this is for me." And can we get some of them? Absolutely. Does it go against our principles? No. Again, are there things that they're going to disagree with us on? Yeah, and that's fine. But as long as everyone coming in understands that these are our principles. You don't have to agree with all of them, but this is what we believe and this is what we want. But you got to bring them in first before you can even have that conversation,
sure.
Right? Like very few of us came here as 100% libertarian. I certainly didn't. My biggest play always, and there are some Democrats who watched Joe Biden shortly after he got elected. One of the first things he did was have a big group conference call, video call with all the major civil rights organizations. And he told them, "To hell with y'all." Like literally, he said that. So I'm sure a lot of them are frustrated by that too. I mean, they knew they weren't getting their preferred pick, but they didn't think he'd tell them to go to hell. So I'm sure there's some gains to be made there as well. And many people who saw this, CARES Act thing or this last stimulus thing, and they're like, "Oh, you're going to take $2,500 from each of us, give most of it to big business, and give us back $600. No, that works. So I think we got something for that. Honestly, I think our biggest play is always the something like 40% of American voters who don't vote. They rarely, if ever, vote, even though they're registered to vote, because they already figured out that voting Republican or Democrat is a waste of time. So a lot of them are probably already naturally libertarian, but they also have the hardest thing that I deal with is people saying, "Well, I like you the most, but I really got to vote Democrat to stop the Republicans," or "I really got to vote Republican to stop the Democrats." The ones that don't vote, they don't care about voting Republican or Democrat.
I got shamed when I told my friends that I was voting Libertarian. It was that I was, it was basically a vote for Trump, or it was a vote for Biden. Trump. And I feel like that's such a weak argument. You want me to vote against my principles or what feels good to me? Is that being truthful? We need to start with being truthful with ourselves and where we're at.
And you know what's interesting about that, Andrew? They told you that you were voting for Trump. What do you want to bet that they didn't bother shaming their Republican friends and saying a vote for Trump is a vote for Trump?
Yeah, right.
What do you want to bet that the Republicans didn't say to the Democrats, you're taking a vote from Donald Trump by voting for Joe Biden? They don't do that to each other. They do that to you.
And to my liberal friends that I vote, libertarian, and they get on me for it, I'm like, I'm the best thing you got in to have a reasonable conversation about conservative values, because I'm with you on like 95% of things. Like, don't shame me for that. Let's have a conversation about it. And I think that's that's a huge problem. I know that the Libertarian Party is, obviously known for its support of the Second Amendment. There's a lot of conversation coming down with the new presidency about, Second Amendment rights. Can you give the libertarian philosophy on, and I think people from the left have a good argument on their concerns with, the amount of school shootings we have here compared to other nations, and, some of the things that are rightful concerns. And you look at other first world countries, our marks are not well compared to a lot of the other ones, but they have much stricter gun laws. So how do we navigate those conversations with, what I think is, everyone's, a right to be able to bear arms as written in our Constitution?
Right. So first I'll say what our position is, which is basically that a gun in the hands of someone working for the government is something like 17 times more likely to kill someone than a gun in yours or my hand. But anyway, so going to the question of like school shootings, that's a very important thing. Like, no one wants to see a shooting happen. No one wants to see a single shooting happen. It's interesting in media that they will cover someone going into a suburban school and killing people as a mass school shooting, but when someone goes into an urban school and kills 2 or 3 people, they call it gang violence. Interesting note there. But anyway, to the question of shootings, when someone goes to a school or a theater or a mall or any of the places that they typically do school shootings, it proves the gun control argument doesn't work. The reason they pick those places is because those are no gun zones. They knew that they would be likely to be the only person with a gun there. And it's a fish in a barrel zone. They knew that they could go in there and kill as many people as they wanted to. And we know that in the areas that have the most gun violence, those are also the areas that have the most gun laws.
Chicago.
So Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, it's illegal to own a weapon in Baltimore. Well, if gun laws worked, there wouldn't be any murder in Baltimore, at least not gun murder.
Bad guys are going to do bad things, right? Regardless of the law.
Right. Bad guys are going to do bad things. So, but I often get told, well, but Spike, our rates are much higher than in other countries. Our shooting murder rates are higher than in other countries. Our murder rates are comparable to most other developed countries. It's pretty much the same. There are some that are lower and some that are higher, and they're not that much lower or higher. It's pretty much the same as the developed world.
Have like box cutter deaths and shit? Is that
well? And that's the thing. They kill each other different ways. They use baseball bats or they use knives. Like right now in the UK, they're in London, they're banning knives, and they're taking knives that are more than I think 4 inches long or some ridiculous thing or whatever. And so what, so now knives are criminal, and they're literally taking people's antique steak knives and stupid nonsense like that because they took the guns. And so everyone started killing each other with knives. And now they're taking the knives. What's that? You're going to take the forks? Like, I mean, at some point, people have been killing each other since, throwing rocks. Like it's there's a way to kill someone. So it's not, taking guns away doesn't end murder. If it did, there'd be no murder in these countries that have very few guns. The point of the Second Amendment is its protection against people that would try to harm you, but not just private actors that would try to harm you. The reality is we've seen another argument against gun control has been at these protests. So we saw unarmed protesters go out to protest police brutality and then immediately get brutalized by the police because they could. They could tear gas them. They could round them all up. They could do whatever they wanted to them. They were armed with little more than signs. Maybe sometimes they had, mace or they had, bricks or whatever. But I mean, they didn't have an effective way to fight back against anyone that would try to harm them. I went to 3 different Black Lives Matter protests. They were heavily armed. Not only were we not infringed upon, In 2 of those protests, there were no police around at all, like none. They were nowhere nearby. They were blocks away. And at one of them, it was me and about a couple of my aides that were there, and about maybe a dozen or so Boog boys, and about 100 armed black men, Black Panthers, Huey P. Newton Gun Club, Black Guns Matter, at Black Lives Matter 757. And we were in the middle of Richmond, Virginia. We were in the middle of, we were standing between I believe it was the Supreme Court and the governor's mansion, right in the center of government in Richmond, protesting gun control and police brutality. There wasn't a cop for 5 blocks. We had to actually look for them. We actually walked around after the speech, and we're like, let's go find one police officer, because where are they? And we looked, and they were all the way down at the bottom of the hill, looking up like this just to make sure everything was okay, which was fine. But they weren't going to go near that, because you don't bring tear gas to a gunfight. The way that you keep powerful people in check is by reminding them that they're soft bodies too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's when you hear people make the argument, but you don't need a automatic, semi-automatic rocket launcher. You go down that. You're right. How people seem to think that you only need it for hunting. It's just you need a shotgun. That seems to be where you hear a lot of people end up on. And I guess obviously you need them for hunting, and a lot of people hunt. But you hear people make this argument that it's just too much firepower. We didn't have rocket launchers and flamethrowers and automatic weapons when the Constitution was written. If the Constitution was written,
that's true.
They wouldn't have put this in. Is that a reasonable statement?
Well, I mean, it's true that we didn't have rocket launchers, and they did have machine guns, but they were much more large and unwieldy. But we also didn't have the internet. We didn't have email. We didn't have text messaging. Do you think the founders would have said that we could have free speech if they knew all that stuff would happen? I would probably guess so, yeah. And the reason for that is because none of those people there were under the delusion that technology wouldn't continue. And especially when it comes to firearms, because in that period of time, it's very interesting when people say the founders could have never possibly. The founders lived during a period of time where, when they were children, the weapons, the finest weapons available were muskets, and by the time they were adults, there were repeating firearms. There were they called them puckle guns, which were repeating firearms. There were rockets. There actually were rocket launchers back then. They weren't the kind of rocket launchers we think of now, right. But like. These things did exist. Obviously, is it more advanced now? Yeah, everything's more advanced now. They would have had they lived in a period of great advancement. Of course, they would have known that technology would continue to advance in firearms. This wasn't a question of whether or not someone should have a musket. This was a question of whether government should be able to have something that the people should have. And in their mind, yeah, not only should the people be able to have whatever they want, but it should actually be the people deciding what the government should have. So when people say, are you okay with some common sense gun control? I say, absolutely. Once the government disarms, we can absolutely have a conversation about what we can have. But as long as the people who are an entire order of magnitude more likely to use a weapon to kill someone than I am, continues to have whatever weapons they want, and they stick me with the bill for it. No, I'm not. I'm definitely not compromising on my right to have whatever I want.
I think that's well said. I think that goes across, not only people who love guns, but when you get into, police brutality and things of that nature. I mean, it has to resonate across different cultures and different races within the country as well, because, as you said, there are governments that are, it's government entities. What did you say? 17 times more likely to
something like that. Yeah. 17 times. Yeah. More likely to kill. Yeah.
That's crazy. So, to kind of wrap things up here, for those of us who want to get more involved in the Libertarian Party, how do you start? I mean, because it seems like such an unattainable thing to get involved and to really make change, but how would you recommend someone, trying to find out more about the Libertarian Party, or just get involved in politics in a more meaningful and mindful way? What would be your recommendation to them?
Well, so those are two completely. So I'll start with the first one. How do you get involved? Number one, go to lp.org/join. Join the Libertarian Party. Get started, join the party. It's $25 a year to join the party.
You get a sweet card
The next
too.
thing you do, you get a card and everything. And if I'm not wearing my pin, but if after you give $1,500 in lifetime contributions, you get a pin too.
Hey.
It's not worth $1,500, but it's so anyway. I don't want to get into that. Go to lp.org/join the party. Once you've done that, they have a list of all the state affiliates and how to reach out to them. Reach out to the state affiliates. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter. You can call them. They have email. You can reach them. Join them. Some of them are free. They ask for a donation, but some of them are free. Some of them are like $5. My state party, it's free. South Carolina's is free. It's not expensive to join those. Then talk to them about your local affiliates. Find the local affiliates. That's where you're going to do most of the work, is at the local level, doing local meetups, doing local activism, doing local candidate stuff, helping local candidates run for office. It's at the local level that it's going to happen. And if you find out that there isn't a local one in your area, start one. The state and national party will help you, and in this coming year, we'll have a whole range of new tools to help you to start an affiliate, or if you join an existing affiliate, to grow that affiliate. But it starts with joining the Libertarian Party. The question as to how to be more mindful in politics, my biggest single bit of advice, because we are running out of time, but my single bit of advice would be this: get your news from a wide variety of sources across the political spectrum, and try to get primary sources as often as possible. One of the cool things about social media is more and more you can see for yourself what happened, and you can actually make judgments for yourself about what happened. If you find that you primarily are getting your news sources from right-leaning sources, or from left-leaning sources, or even from libertarian-leaning sources, don't do that. Because you're going to find yourself in an echo chamber. I am as libertarian as it gets. I don't just get my news from libertarian sources, okay? You got to get it from across the political spectrum and try to focus on getting, and it takes longer. It's not as easy, but you have to try to, go across the spectrum of ideas to be able to get the sources. Or you can bypass that all and just follow me, and I'll tell you what's happening.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, thank you so much. I learned a ton today. I know everyone will. Keep doing the good work, and however we can support, we'll be doing it here from Michigan. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, man. I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, take care, man.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. You can find Everything Borrowed on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Show your support and drop a 5-star review to help more people find our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Stay up to date with us on Facebook, Instagram, and everythingborrowedpodcast.com. EBP is produced by Chelsea Cox, Jason Brown, and Vox Adams. Edited and filmed by Nick Ferguson. Art is by Adam Yarborough. Everything Borrowed is an After Hours Media production. Copyright 2021.